Okay, so what we're about to dive into is a really raw, first person look at life inside a Berlin penal's psychiatric unit. This all comes from the writings of one man who was there, inside Ward 8, between 2012 and 2014. It's his story, completely unfiltered. And right away, you get this kind of stark, visceral detail. It really sets the tone for everything that follows. The author doesn't just list facts. He paints these incredibly vivid pictures of the people he was locked up with, starting with his very first roommate. So, let's start by exploring the world of Ward 8 through the author's own sketches of his fellow patients. These are his impressions, right? The people who made up his entire world in there.
The first person we meet is an Arab man. He was born into one of those powerful clan families, but now he's a total outcast. They completely ignore him, just left to fend for himself inside the system.
This guy was just a bundle of contradictions. That drooping eye he was known for? He got it from a baseball bat to the face during a burglary that went wrong. And this seemed to feed into his delusions. He'd spend hours rapping into his fist, performing for what he thought was a massive, cheering crowd in the courtyard below. But at the same time, he had this sharp, almost predatory side. He ran this little business renting out his ancient PlayStation 2 to the more vulnerable patients for, get this, 50 euros a day. And, as it turns out, he wasn't the only aspiring artist on the ward. The author says the whole place was often just filled with the sound of these self-proclaimed gangster rappers trying to make it big. And this whole performance thing, it didn't stop there. The author's next roommate was a German guy who called himself Rain. He even had a big R tattooed right on his neck. So Rain's backstory, at least the one he told the author, is a wild one. He used to be a dealer for a clan, but things went south when his boss, supposedly trying to make sure he can testify, dosed his drink with an entire sheet of LSD. According to the story, Rain never really came down from that trip. He just launched into this absolutely chaotic crime spree, even setting up a little second-hand shop in his apartment to sell off everything he stole. And the scale of this crime spree, it's just staggering. Rain managed to rack up over 120 criminal complaints in only 3 months. The author describes him as being totally ruthless, but, not very good at it. He was getting caught almost every single day. Now, Rain wasn't a solo act. He had a buddy, another patient, a Polish guy, who was really into what the author just calls double time rap. And the two of them would just spend hours and hours every day working on rhymes. The author says at first, maybe it was a little funny, but it quickly turned into this unbearable, nonstop soundtrack to his life. So this constant rapping, it led to one of the most bizarre stories in the entire account. The author, totally fed up, challenges the Polish rapper to a game of chess. And the stakes were designed for maximum humiliation. The loser had to dress up as a woman, sing Pippi Longstocking in the dining hall, or pay 50 euros. Well, the author almost blew it, losing his queen on the fourth move, but somehow he managed to claw his way back and win the game. After weeks of trying to get out of it, the rapper was finally forced to do it. He paraded through the dining hall, singing and dancing, while all the other patients just stared, probably assuming he was having some kind of psychotic episode. But for all the dark comedy of something like that chess match, the author also shows us the much, much grimmer side of things. So now we're going to shift a bit and look at the more desperate survival tactics and the tragic fates of some of these guys. In a place like this, the line between just coping and having a full-blown psychotic break, well, it pretty much disappears. And this led to some truly jarring behavior that the author saw with his own eyes. The kind of stuff he saw was just all over the map. On one hand, you have the pure desperation of the Polish rapper huffing a whole can of deodorant just to get high. On the other, there's this weird, almost bizarre creativity, like his invention using ham and a hot radiator. It wasn't just him, though. An elderly patient filed a formal, written request to buy a 300 euro sex toy, which the clinic actually denied because they were worried he'd rent it out. And then you had these huge, elaborate delusions, like the Turkish ex-soldier, who was convinced the world's oceans were being pumped into space to build a global highway for a new society that would live only in their cars. And while all this was going on, the medications they were given had these massive physical effects. Take the Polish rapper, for example. He gained 50 kilograms. That's over 110 pounds in just 9 months. The author talks about literally watching the medication make him balloon from 80 kilos up to 130. For some of these men, the story didn't end when they left the ward. The author later found out what happened to a couple of them after they went their separate ways, and, well, the outcomes were often tragic. The Polish rapper, he was eventually released after 8 years. The author says one of their last conversations was about how to buy drugs on the darknet. Later on, word got back to him. The rapper had died from a heroin overdose. Then there was another patient, a guy who'd been locked up for 20 years for killing his father. He was always talking about suicide, and one day he was found dead in his room, also from a heroin overdose.
So, after painting this incredibly vivid picture of the world and the people around him, the author finally turns the camera on himself and his own showdown with the German justice system.
He says he went into his trial with a plan. He was going to leap over the judge's bench and hit him with a Superman punch. But the court saw something coming. He wasn't put in the main courtroom. Instead, they stuck him in this tiny phone booth-sized cell made of bulletproof glass. So, with his physical plan ruined, he just switched to pure defiance. He fired his lawyer, started verbally condemning the judges, and made a very clear throat-slitting gesture at them. Then he and his mother, who was also on trial, just started shouting blah 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 over and over until they were both thrown out.
And his own words from the text really capture the headspace he was in. You see, in his mind, he wasn't just messing up the trial. He was holding his own trial and delivering his own verdict. So what was the court's actual verdict? Well, this brings us to the official diagnosis and the author's complete and total rejection of it. This sentence came down under two key parts of the German criminal code. First, Section 20, which basically says you're not criminally responsible because of a mental disorder. But then comes Section 63. This one lets the state lock you up in a secure hospital indefinitely for as long as they think you're a danger to the public. As the author points out, it's a sentence with no end date. And this is where the core conflict is just laid bare. The court's diagnosis? Paranoid schizophrenia. They even claimed his mental illness was contagious and that he had infected his mother. His response is just absolute. He says, flat out, I definitely do not have this illness. He even sarcastically tells his readers to use disinfectant while reading his story. When they say he needs therapy for his delusions, he just replies, I never imagined anything and have absolutely nothing to work through. It's a total 100% rejection of their reality. This complete refusal to accept the official diagnosis, the very label that defines his entire incarceration, it all boils down to one central, massive question that this whole account leaves us with.
The author's story really forces you to ask, is all this, his detailed writing, his absolute refusal to accept their label, is that just another symptom of the illness they diagnosed him with? Or is that very act of resistance, of looking the system in the eye and saying, no, you are wrong about me, is that the most rational thing a person can do? Is it maybe the last proof of a sane mind trapped in an insane system? The text doesn't give us any easy answers. It just leaves that question hanging there for us to think about.